In May 2020, Rio Tinto's destruction of a 46,000-year-old significant site in the Pilbara against the wishes of the traditional owners drew headlines around the world. It prompted a federal parliamentary inquiry, and many investors were vocal in their calls for changes inside the company. Jon, the reason Rio Tinto detonated the site at Juukan Gorge was to access high-grade iron ore. In fact, 8 million tonnes of ore at a market value of $130 million was extracted. Given Rio was seeking to increase shareholder value and in fact did nothing illegal in this, why was there such an outcry?
Well, Emma, I think a lot of the outcry really it became apparent very early on just how significant a site this was to the traditional owners and how profound a loss of a site of this kind would be to them. And I think that really generated a type of outcry, just given, I think, not only the investment community, but the broader community saw this as an unacceptable outcome. Within the investment community, though, I think it became apparent that people have come to view Rio Tinto as one of the exceptional operational managers, not only in the Pilbara, but really around the world. And so for something like this to happen at Rio Tinto, at a company that is judged as one of the benchmarks by which others are judged, is really disappointing to investors. I guess thirdly, as we sort of delve into the information, as we discussed this with the company and we read the parliamentary submissions and got a deeper understanding of exactly what happened, it's clear there was a lot of opportunities missed along the way to prevent an outcome of this kind. And that again sort of added to the disappointment that we saw. You know, we've known for a long time that operating in the Pilbara requires a very close interaction with traditional owners, with Indigenous people. And I think as investors, perhaps we got the sense that this interaction was working better than it truly was. And so for this to happen, again, it's making us sort of rethink how that relationship is truly working. And I guess the final aspect of this is it was very clear early that there would be significant ramifications for the company. And indeed, we've seen some senior management leave the company at a very difficult time. You know, Rio Tinto is dealing with pressures around COVID on the operational side, pressures around China, and direct pressures in the iron ore market. So to have this kind of disruption at a time like this is very disappointing and very challenging for the market. But ultimately, it shows you something that we know, and that's that social license to operate is a really significant risk to companies.
So on the point of social license, Jon, often when we're looking at companies, we really see the intersection between social risk and financial risk as we are here. How do you determine when you're analysing a company when those ESG risks, such as a social risk, start to present as an investment risk?
Well, there's not too many risks that can't present themselves as financial risks. In the case of social risks, those financial implications and the risks that they introduce can be very significant indeed. And we've seen a number of examples of that in recent years. But really, we always have to pay very close attention, particularly in mining, to the interaction between the local community and the mining operation itself. You know, whenever we look at a mining operation, we think about the local impacts, things like noise, dust, water pollution or water usage are all factors that a mining industry really has to get right to be successful in a local area. You know, recently, interestingly, we've had to think about the global impacts of mining. So a mine site can have impacts globally, particularly coal mining and oil and gas extraction and the carbon they produce. So, you know, we've gone through that local to global, but local impacts have been significant in the past recently as well. In Brazil, we've had 2 very significant dam failures. They had huge impacts on local community, including tragically loss of life, loss of homes, loss of whole towns, impacts the fishing industries and industry more broadly in those local areas. So we know that the local impacts are very important. In the case of Juukan, interestingly, you know, the site is relatively small in the scale of the Pilbara, but the destruction of this site is going to have implications on mining, not just in the Pilbara, but really throughout Australia.
Since the Juukan Gorge incident, we have seen other companies in Australia give greater focus to how they are managing their heritage management and other issues in this space. Jon, where do you see the greatest impacts continuing to fall in Australia?
Well, interestingly, one of the media responses and one of the broader responses we saw early on was that because we haven't seen anything really of the scale of Juukan in terms of the impact, in terms of the community reaction before in terms of heritage management, one of the reactions was, well, heritage management must have been well managed in the past. And as we delve into the situation, as we understand more from the Indigenous communities, I think there's real questions being raised about whether or not that's correct. There's real questions about whether the engagement between between mining companies and the traditional owners has really been as deep as we thought. There's questions over whether or not traditional owners have agency over the kind of rights that they need to protect sites that are important to them. There's I guess, more broader questions. Do Indigenous groups really have access to the legal resources, the administrative resources that they need to make timely decisions around sites that are important to us? And those sort of questions will be very important to us as investors going forward.
So we're seeing that reputational, organisational, governance risks are continuing to be as important often as a pure financial analysis of a company when you're making your investment decisions. And I think we're going to see that continue as companies respond to things like changes in state and federal legislation in this space, greater focus, all for the better, on cultural heritage and management and engagement with local communities. I think we're going to see this continue to play out and take even greater focus in the years ahead.
And that's right, and I think, as you know, it's clear that legislation in this area is going to change, but it's also been clear from the response that we've seen that whatever legislation is in place, the company is going to be held to an even higher standard by the investment community. They'll have a significant impact on the way we think about these investments going forward.
And ultimately, that's going to be of greater benefit to both the investments that we hold and also the communities that we operate in.
That's right.
Thanks for your time today, Jon. It's been a great conversation.